Thank you for joining me, JD, and my special guest, Grams, for Metaphysical Tea Time with JD and Grams. Often on my long trips, my Grams and I talk to keep me awake on the road. Along the way, we discuss every topic under the sun, and I'm inviting you to join us once a month for a tea time chat. This month, in honor of Easter, we'll take on the rather controversial topic of alternate endings to the Easter story. This is in no way intended to offend, for we both have had a Christian upbringing, but rather to look at the story from every angle. Here's my Grams.
Hi, this is Graham talking.
So, we were talking on my last trip on the road about a wonderful documentary that I was listening to, which I will include in the link, so please take some time to listen to it. But all about other possible endings of the Easter story. Because we all have heard the traditional biblical Easter story, which Jesus was persecuted for basically being kind of a standout guy, and he was put on the cross. 3 days later, he rises and he shows himself to the apostles, and then the story gets spread. Now, that is a very, very general way of putting it, but that's the nutshell version. Because I think we're going to spend a little more time on the alternate versions.
Yes, this is fun. I'm learning so much from JD.
One of the things that I thought was rather fascinating was in this documentary, and again, I urge you to read it and we'll link to it. But one of the things that they were talking about was the possibility that Jesus, while they weren't debating whether he was on the cross, whether or not he actually passed away. Because one of the things they were saying was that traditionally it was well known that people who were crucified would take, I think they said it was 3 or 6 days, but it was days. And with Jesus, it took a few hours. It took, I think they said, in some parts of the Bible, they'll say as few as 4 hours, and in other parts of the Bible, they'll say as many as 6 hours. And I think that's the story that you got when you were in school, right?
Oh, yes, that's the way we were brought up. Yeah.
So, and me too, because I've been to both Catholic school and Baptist Sunday school, and both stories are pretty similar. And in both stories, I've always heard, and I don't know about you, Graham, but I always heard that Mary, both Marys, were at the foot of the cross.
Yes.
Now, in this documentary, they were saying that nobody was really allowed very close, except, and I am terrible, terrible with memory, so forgive me, folks, but if you listen to the documentary, it's on there. But the person who was supposed to check on him did not do a thorough job. Apparently, it was very rushed. And they were talking about Joseph of Arimathea being part of this story, and he was close. And they were also talking about, in the very beginning, Jesus was given a sponge with vinegar, I believe.
Yes, that's what I remember. Yeah.
So, but they were saying that it's possible because even back then there were drugs that could put you into, or substances that could put you into a sleep-like state. So they were saying that it's possible that it wasn't vinegar and it might have put him into a sleep-like state, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
Isn't it, huh? Jeez.
Oh, it really was a fascinating documentary.
Boy,
and
I wish I had seen it, but I'm glad you're talking about it because, for me, I never heard this, and it's great.
Well, we will definitely take time to watch it later.
Yeah, I hope so.
So one of the other things that this person was saying in the documentary that they could have hastened the crucifixion by breaking the legs, and there would be nothing to support, but that wasn't the case because he had the nail going through the feet.
Right.
So you can kind of take that out of the options.
Yeah.
And again, it was between 4 and 6 hours that he passed. But the question is, did he really pass? They didn't stab him. They didn't do any final, um, definitive motion to make sure that Jesus had actually passed.
This is on a documentary.
This is on the documentary.
Wow.
And but they're taking from the Bible, which I thought was fairly interesting. One of the other things that they talked about was when Jesus was brought to the tomb, he was not brought normal embalming herbs, he was brought healing herbs. And I thought, whoa, that's pretty interesting.
Isn't it? My gosh.
Because you'd think if he was passing, they would use the traditional embalming herbs, not herbs to revive someone. And the person in the documentary brought up a really good point that what got lost in translation is that it's possible that they revived him. And that is what was considered the being resurrected.
Isn't that something?
And so we as modern day humans, and even 1,000 years ago, we would say, well, that was resurrected from the dead. But they, in the ancient texts, that's not really what they said. They just said it was resurrected.
Yeah.
And to their mind, and to their very ancient mind, they wouldn't have been able to necessarily know the difference if they didn't see him being given a substance.
True enough.
And apparently, it was also not uncommon for family members to come and rescue people off the crucifix. So even if he was taken off early without death, that wouldn't have been uncommon. That oftentimes criminals were taken down, and they were taken care of by their family.
By their family, sure.
And then they lived fine lives afterwards, and their service had been, well, their sentence had been served, so to speak. One of the other things, and it just flew my head. I hate when that happens. But what is your take on that, Grammy?
Well, I think it's another way to look at it that I've never dreamed of, because we never asked questions. The Bible was the Bible, period.
Yep.
And this is a different slant on somebody else's thinking, and it makes it interesting.
Do you think it's possible?
It sounds logical.
To me, it sounds very logical.
Yeah.
Even when you look at the Romeo and Juliet story, what happened was she took the drug to make her look like she was in death state, and he thought that she was dead.
Yeah.
And so he killed himself, and then she ended up killing herself too. But that's a whole other story.
That's
for
another
day.
Story. Yeah.
Yeah.
We go off on different slants every time.
Oh my gosh, yes. Every time we hit this topic, it's never the same.
I know, but this is so interesting because there's so many versions of the story, and all we know is from our Bible.
Well, the other thing, and again taking right from the Bible, that I thought was very interesting was the fact that, unlike many of the other criminals who were tried, or, well, not really tried, but sentenced to crucifixion, Jesus's was in particular quite harsh.
Yeah.
Considering what he was being accused of, which frankly a lot of other people at the time were also claiming to be messiahs, or they had their own cults. In fact, a lot of people may not know this, but John the Baptist had his own following and turned from the following and said, this is the man we should be following, and thus Jesus's grew, enormously. And I wonder because one of the things the documentary talked about was that Jesus had a very wealthy uncle and a very politically connected uncle, and I think they said that was Joseph of Arimathea, and that they swept him off to Gaul, which is in south of France. Now, if you followed the Dan Brown books at all, they make reference to the whole southern France connection, and they talk about the fact that Mary may have conceived, and personally
he was married to her. That's the story I heard.
Yeah, and they don't talk about this because they like to think that Jesus had to be celibate, but the fact of the matter was he was a Jewish
He was a
man,
Jewish man.
and he was a teacher and a carpenter. He was, for all intents and purposes, a Jewish man in good standing until he went around,
Teaching.
well, no, proclaiming he was the Son of God.
Okay.
That's when things kind of went weird.
Ah.
But up until that point, it's not unlikely that he would have had a wife. Um, and I'm not saying a consort, I'm saying a wife. And I think it would have been, as a Jewish male, I mean, you want to talk bucking the tradition, and while yes, he was bucking many of the traditions, the fact is that it's awfully suspicious that no one in the New Testament other than Joseph and Mary makes mention of anybody being married. But we know that people were married.
Yeah.
They had wives, they had kids.
It's so interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Jeez. I'm learning so much.
And I would imagine that even some of the apostles may have traveled with their wives.
Well,
They were fully grown men.
absolutely.
So they most likely would have had a wife, and a lot of them had occupations that would have allowed them to marry.
Yeah.
So
you never hear about that ever.
Right, and I think that is very, that is very
That's
telling.
another story.
Well, because a lot of the Bible that we read now was written by celibate monks.
Okay.
And
of
so,
course.
right, and they take, I think it was the letters of St. Paul to the Corinthians, that, and he was the only one who really made mention of needing to be celibate, or without I think the distractions of the flesh. I could be misquoting, but it was the letters to the Corinthians where that was mentioned, and it is a practice around the world to forsake that, those pleasures so that you can devote yourself to God. So
that's what the priests do.
Right, but not all, and really not until much, much later, because there was a pope who had a child. But again, story.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, that's another story.
Yes, there was a pope with a child,
really?
And yes, my Catholic friends, please go look it up. There was a pope with a child. And by the way, for anybody who has not been tuned in, Mary Magdalene was never and never was a prostitute, and that was recanted long, long ago by the Vatican. So,
oh my goodness.
Double check, do your homework. But I think it's also.
I want to see that documentary.
Oh, we will.
Oh my gosh.
In fact, we'll watch it tomorrow.
All right.
There was, and going back to Mary, because I think that's even an interesting topic. A lot of people surmise that she may have been with child. And there are so many references to this in the south of France. And something that I didn't know, and I've done a lot of reading on this on a variety of books, but one of the things that was mentioned was that Gaul was actually a Roman province. And if this uncle had very strong political connections, it would have been easy for him to just say, oh, let's bury him over there, but really he goes off and lives a long life. Now we don't know. We don't know this for sure.
It's so interesting.
Yes, and there's some that even say that he went over to the east, and traveled being a prophet and a teacher and a healer all the way out. In fact, there is a shrine, and I'm not sure if it's in Pakistan or India or even Tibet. That was a whole other documentary. I can't even remember which one, where they claim to have his remains, and that I will try to find it and link it to you guys. So you have the one aspect of did he pass? And according to this documentary, the answer, they didn't say yes or no, because of course they're not gonna say yes or no.
Of course not.
But they were leaning towards it looked like he didn't pass, or if he did, that Mary was shooed away over to Gaul.
Okay.
And again, there's very little proof for any of this, except they did find one book that talked about Jesus having a daughter.
Oh my goodness.
The word was filia, which in Latin, the A is feminine, and Philia was referring to a child that was female. Um, and so I thought that was really
Yeah.
kind of cool.
Yeah, it goes in so many directions. It's interesting.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys, that this is looping around a little bit. It is kind of hard to keep this in a linear flow.
We talk about this on her ride home.
Oh yes, goodness, and
Yeah.
thank goodness for that.
Oh, I learned so much.
So,
It's interesting.
so to summarize, so far what we have is
Mm.
he may have been given a drug to help him to pass out, and then given revival herbs. His particular execution, if you will, because it was just a long drawn out one, but um, crucifixion was made a very big dramatic show, which also is, and I think I touched on this, but we kind of got diverted, a little suspicious because he's one of the only ones that had that really great drama. And my question is, were they doing it because they were like, look, Joseph of Arimathea, get your nephew out of here, do what you want to do, but we need to make this look good. And so they put on a really big show. Second um, thing is that he passed away very, very quickly. And, some say that this is a miracle because, God eased his suffering, but others are saying that it could be that he wasn't actually dead. The third is that with the healing herbs, that um, it wasn't necessarily meant to fool anyone, but that, or maybe they were, we don't really know, and frankly, we'll never know. But it was mostly just to maybe they looked and they went, oh my gosh, he really is alive, and he still had the scars, and so he was still in his physical body. Rather than ethereal, kind of like we were all taught. I don't know, were
Right.
you taught, was it ethereal in your Bible school?
Yeah, he went to heaven.
Mm. No, no, I mean when Doubting Thomas had to feel him.
Oh.
Was I know in my Sunday school we were taught that it was almost like spiritual body, but still kind of physical. It was they kind of glossed over that. Nobody really had the answer. I don't know. How about you?
No, no. Yeah,
You
there no answer.
oh.
We never questioned ever.
But did they give you what his physical or non-physical state was
No,
after?
no.
Okay. See, and that's another thing. Like they don't account for whether it was, were people having a almost like when a medium sees a spirit, because for some mediums it is a very physical, visceral event, and for others it is more in the third eye. So how, or was he really physically just revived and, hey guys, like, I'm here. Sure, Thomas,
He
go
was
ahead, poke the
he was
holes.
in that state for 3 days.
Yes.
There was a big rock in front of the cave,
Yes. Yes.
and they took the rock away, and they saw him in there.
No, he was not in
He
there.
was not in there.
No, Mary was the first to go and see, and the rock had been rolled away,
Oh,
and he was
that's
not
right.
there.
That's right. Yes.
But he did appear to her first on the road so that she could go tell the others,
Ah,
which again is kind of weird that he went to her first and not
yeah, his
not
mother.
yeah, well, anybody else,
Yeah.
like the apostles.
Yes, yeah.
Which if you read the Gospel of Magdalene, that's very interesting too, because in the Gospel of Magdalene, um, it talks about how the other apostles resented her,
Uh-huh.
because she was so close to Jesus.
Oh, yes. I do.
So that is kind of where we are right now. Were Jesus and Mary married? We don't know, but I personally kind of think that they were, just from looking at the fact that she was the one who
She was
helped him with the herbs and healed him, and kind of, well,
she
we,
was
we don't know
close.
healed. We
No,
don't know healed.
no.
But she was also referred to as the favored one from
Mm.
the other apostles who were kind of jealous.
Yeah.
Um and there are stories of her all over the south of France, which was a Roman province.
Yeah.
So it would have been a perfect place to kind of go hide out and away from the drama that was going on,
Boy, so many
you know.
different things to think about. Wow. It makes you stop and think, what? it could have happened that way. We don't know.
It could have.
Yeah.
And if you go with, there were other gospels that were not put in to the Bible. And one of them talks about him and Mary living a very long and happy life out until he passed.
Imagine.
However, another one, and this is one of the other documentaries, talk about him going east as a prophet and healer, which we talked about a little before. And it actually, where they say that, I think they referred to him by his actual name, which is Yeshua. I always mispronounce it. I apologize for my friends out there who can say it properly. But when you cross one foot over the other, I'm skipping a step. Sorry. In the documentary, they show a set of footprints that belong to the man who was buried in that shrine. And it was 2 feet, and there were, well, not nail, they don't know if it was nail holes, but they said it was scars. Yes, thank you, Grammy.
Yeah.
It was scars.
Mm.
And now they weren't, if you looked at each foot, they weren't in the exact same spot. But if you placed one foot over the other, it would be the exact match if a nail had gone through it. Mm. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Because they were talking about how he was ministering and teaching for about 50 years past when the crucifixion was supposed to happen.
Yeah.
So this is all very interesting stuff, and I urge you, as an audience, or listeners, to do your own research, to read on this. Go back and read your Bible, read the details, and it's not to question the validity of Jesus's connection to God, because I personally focus on his life, and that he changed and revolutionized the way everybody related and thought to God. He brought people from a point of fear, where God was a spiteful, vengeful God, to a loving, nurturing Father.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the important part, not how did he die? Well, did he resurrect? Did he not? Because that to me is almost irrelevant. I know that is where Christianity hinges on, he resurrected for our sins, but couldn't living and teaching and giving us lessons to live our life by, couldn't that be the true salvation?
I tell you, it's very, very interesting. I love to learn everything I can. And I am.
Well, and I think I get part of my curiosity from my Grams.
I like to know everything. I may not believe everything, but I like to learn it.
And I think that's a good point too, that no matter what you are reading or listening to, whether it's a documentary or a book, it is healthy and wise to question.
It is.
And for those of you who do believe in a higher power, in God and Jesus or whoever, Muhammad, Buddha, I can't even think at the moment, but divine spiritual power, if you believe in that, and that you believe that we were created in their image, well, I would like to think that they were intelligent, sentient beings, or being that created us and wanted us to learn as much as we possibly could while we are here.
Yes, certainly. And I'm learning all the time.
Well, and thank you, Grams, for talking with me and us. And
our cup of tea.
Yes, and our cup of tea. Here is signing off, and to next tea time. Everybody have a wonderful and happy rest of April, and we will bring you more in May.
Bye-bye.
Bye.